Welcome to this gathering hosted by the Unitarian Universalist Church of Bowling Green. Whether you are here in person with us or you've joined us online, we are so glad that you are joining us. My name's Tim McGahey. I have been a member of the church since 2019, and it's a great joy for me to be here. And if you haven't already set your phones to silence, which I'm not sure I have either, so I'm going to practice here for everybody. Please make sure that those are turned off, and I just did. We are a welcoming congregation, whoever you are, however you identify, wherever you come from, and whoever you love, you are welcome here. Our Sunday services are different each week so that we can honor and learn from our wide array of traditions and beliefs. And today our speaker is Reverend Dr. Deane Oliva. She's associate minister here, and she is down in her winter home and has made a really wonderful talk for us. I enjoyed working with it, and I think you'll find it eye-opening if you're not aware of some of the information she talks about. So I promise it will be eye-opening at the least. And though we all walk our own paths here in this place, on the land where the Osage and the Cherokee and the Shawnee walked, and now is at this time, we will journey on this community together. I am going to light the chalice here, and let me make sure I've got my stuff in here in terms of order. And I'd like to say that as I light this chalice, we light this chalice to affirm that the new light is ever waiting to break through to enlighten our way. That new truth is ever waiting to break through to illuminate our minds, and that new love is ever waiting to break through to warm our hearts. May we be open to this light and the rich possibilities that it brings up. Let us now play Rise Up. Other reader was not able to be here today, so I'm going to be doing the opening reading, and this is. Let me get. Sorry, my notes are out of alignment here on that. I guess I should have put page numbers on them. These opening words are by Quinn Caldwell. If you came to this place expecting a tame story, you came to the wrong place. If you came for a story that does not threaten you, you came for a different story than the one we are going to tell. If you came to hear of the coming of God who only showed up so that you could have a nice day with your loved ones, then you came for a God who we do not worship here. For even a regular baby is not a tame thing, and goodness that cannot threaten complacency and evil is not much good at all. And a God who would choose to give up power and invincibility to become an infant for you certainly didn't do it so that you could have dinner. But if you came because you think that unwed teenage mothers are some of the strongest people in the world, if you came because you think that the kind of people who work third shift doing stuff you'd rather not do might attract an angel's attention before you, snoring comfortably in bed would. If you came because you think there are wise men and women to be found among undocumented travelers from far lands and that they might be able to help you, then this is the place for you. If you came for a story of reversals that might end up reversing you, if you came for a tale of adventure and bravery where strong and gentle people win and the powerful and violent go down in dust, where the rich lose their money but find lives and poor are raised up like kings, if you come to be reminded that God loves you too much to leave you unchanged, if you come to follow the light, even if it blinds you, if you came for salvation and not safety, then my friends, you are in the right place. And might I add that if you come and listen to this story, it will make you as dignified as a king and hopefully as a kind-hearted as a grandmother. Let's see, I get my order back in here now that we've done this. I think we're ready for the children's recessional. Or we have any today with us? Before we start our meditation, I'd like to bring to attention here, I've been asked, we have a lot to think about today. We have a lot to mourn. The world is changing and we're getting into a hot war. As Russia invades the Ukraine, violence has already killed hundreds and displaced thousands and presents terrifying possibilities for escalations toward global war. First time we've had this kind of situation since World War II in Europe. Our hearts are heavy today. On top of the deep weariness and fear we have collectively been navigating, these latest headlines feel like too much to bear, and we are with you in grief and rage. Our faith aspires to build a different world. We stand with the people of the Ukraine. Let us use this quiet moment to reflect and pray and send thoughts for immediate end to this war. As I will bring us to attention and meditation, let us think on these thoughts and others. Thank you. We would now like to do a responsive reading. Diane Lewis is going to help me here with this, and I'm sorry we had as I said, our assigned reader was unable to make it this morning, and we'll follow along. Again, the words that are in italics, which actually will be in bold on this version here, be the words that you will be reading. And this is a responsive reading. I do not like the I Hate Feelings by Albert Sierra.
I do not like the I hate it feeling, but I have it.
Now we can have, I hate it that there are too many good people who allow the ways and works of violence to continue.
I hate it that too many people who know better simply talk and pray about justice and then believe that they have thus fulfilled the requirements of justice.
I hate it that the world seems to be top-heavy with people who seek to serve themselves with pleasure that demeans human nature, with activities that waste their potential.
I hate it that there are too few who strive to stay free from the pressure to conform, free from the mediocrity of compromise, free from the tyranny of approval.
I would be delivered from all this evasion and blindness, apathy and self-service.
Because I live in this world, it is my world, in my time. I must fully realize what that means to me and to the world as I touch it.
I will then let my hate for all that spoils the beauty of the earth, all that diminishes the life of the world, move me to thought and effort that celebrate and promote peace, that honor and serve justice.
Damned be conformity and compromise and approval. I should not even begin to seek, hold, desire.
Yes, I do not like that I hate feeling, but it must have it. I will use it to move my mind and heart where they can do the most good. Thank you very much. And on through there. We're getting ready to hear a speech that was recorded. I got a chance to work on it a little bit. She had sent it to me before, and I didn't really have to do very much. I think you'll find it very interesting. Do we? Oh.
There's the opening song. We give thanks. Yes.
Oh, well then let's do that.
I was just following the lead.
Thank you. There's a good thing that we have Diane with us on this.
Give
thank you for reminding me about that. Deane had requested that hymn in particular. As I was mentioning earlier, I'm very happy to do this. I found, as I was listening to this talk and listening to it, I thought it was quite wise. So actually, without any other thoughts, or let us listen to Reverend Dr. Deane Oliva talking about Intrigue and Mayhem.
Able to join you all today. I am recording from New Life Christian Church in Port St. Joe, Florida. Historically African American community that works to improve its community on a daily basis. So we're going to get into a little history today. And we're going to try and make it palatable, but get into UU history. Thomas Jefferson, our third president and founding father of our country, was a self-proclaimed Unitarian. On many occasions, he wrote about his opposition to slavery, and yet he was also a slaveholder. In 1994, our yearly Unitarian Universalist General Assembly was held in the district named in his honor, the Thomas Jefferson District. As part of the program's festivities, participants were invited to join into a period costume ball. The African Americans wondered, should they come in chains or tatters? Oops. 17 years later, the district changed its name to the Southeast District, and 9 years after that, our Thomas Jefferson Church in Louisville changed its name to All People's Church. While Jefferson may have been a product of his times, of course we certainly don't want to uphold those outdated values. Should we? We are such a complicated denomination. We are one of the most liberal religious groups in this era, and yet we fester in a cloudy consciousness of confused values and practice. And the truth is, it's always been that way. William Ellery Channing and Theodore Parker are arguably two of the most influential Unitarians of the 19th century. Channing, an exemplar of Christian piety and a champion of human rights, spoke passionately about the need for a reasoned approach to biblical study. And he was the first spokesman for Unitarianism, delineating its basic beliefs in a masterful ordination sermon in Baltimore in 1819 for Jared Sparks. Yet for many, he was uncommonly moderate on the question of slavery. Perhaps because many Unitarians either had slaves or profited from the slave trade. We know that he didn't join the abolitionist movement because he didn't agree with the way in which they acted, and he felt that voluntary associations limited a person's autonomy. However, when in a conversation with Samuel May, and he was lamenting the abolitionist inflammatory language, May confronted him on his own silence and said, "Why, sir, have you not taken this matter in hand yourself?" Channing acknowledged the rebuke, thoughtfully considered it, and changed his course. And so Channing, our hero, had to be prodded in order to live his faith. How about you? How about me? How about us in terms of what incentives do we need in order to live our true values? Theodore Parker is another one of our heroes. You can remember that Parker, along with Ralph Waldo Emerson, was instrumental in the Transcendentalist movement. He also led the Boston opposition to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Most Boston Unitarian ministers, however, either refused to oppose the legislation or publicly supported it as a constitutional obligation and as a politically correct necessity to the South that would save the Union and settle the slavery issue. Some even argued that catching fugitive slaves was sanctioned by Scripture. A muddle of opinions. Parker, however, chaired the executive branch of the Vigilance Committee, which provided fugitives with material aid, legal assistance, and help in eluding capture. He hid former slaves and often preached with pistols in the pulpit. Our hero. And yet, Parker asserted that the Anglo-Saxon race was more progressive than all others, European or non-European, and made many condescending and disparaging comments about the potential of Africans for progress. This was the 19th century. Perhaps the 20th century is better. The first African-American Unitarian minister, Ethel Brown, was born in Falmouth, Jamaica in 1875. He discovered Unitarianism one Easter Sunday when the strangeness of the Trinitarian arithmetic struck him so forcibly that I decided then and there to sever my connection with the church, which enunciated so impossible proposition. That afternoon, he began his studies, and he later started a Unitarian lay center in Montego Bay. Later, Brown wrote a letter addressed to any Unitarian minister in New York City. Amazingly, it found its way to the secretary of the Unitarian Fellowship Committee, who passed it on to President Southworth of Meadville Lombard Theological School. It was just Meadville Theological School at that time. Brown was accepted as a special two-year student, and upon his ordination in 1912, he returned home. His work supported by both the American and the foreign Unitarian associations. And yet, here is the association's evaluation of his work. The Reverend E.E. Brown is pronouncedly Black, which is somewhat of a handicap to him in his work, since those of his race who are fortunate enough to approach absolute whiteness are too proud to sit under any minister save a white gentleman. He is fairly well educated, seems endowed with tact and great common sense, and he is a speaker of considerable eloquence and force. It was decided to give money for a building, but to eliminate payment for the minister, placing Brown in the position of begging or appealing for funds. Brown and his family moved to New York, where he started the Harlem Unitarian Church. He became a leader in the community, and he was involved in many social issues. But he was also in the grips of poverty and prejudice and without the support of the Unitarian leadership. Now, the new Unitarian leadership thought African Americans were of lower classes, shiftless rascals, and have an extraordinary histrionic vein, arguing that it was an impertinence to spread Unitarianism among them. In 1929, Reverend Brown lost his fellowship, and he was deemed a nuisance for his persistent financial solicitations and his radical social and political views. But finally, in 1935, his fellowship was reinstated when, with the support of the ACLU, legal action was threatened. And that, of course, was not an isolated incident. But it's a pretty cool story. W.H.G. Carter was an African-American minister who in 1918 founded the Church of the Unitarian Brotherhood in Cincinnati. Other Unitarians in Cincinnati knew about the church but turned their backs. They made no effort to forge personal connections, and they offered no material support to the struggling congregation beyond a box or two of their old hymnals. For 2 decades, 20 years, no one even bothered to inform the American Unitarian Association in Boston of its existence. When the AUU finally did find out in 1938, it sent an investigator. The official report captured perfectly the tone and substance of mainstream Unitarian attitudes at the time toward Blacks. It described Carter as a kindly man, quite intelligent. It noted, however, that the neighborhood surrounding his storefront church was poor and characterized by rowdiness. and that the two local Unitarian ministers who had spoken there agreed that the response they received was not very intelligent. The conclusion: I do not recommend Unitarian fellowship for Mr. Carter or subsidy for his movement. Shortly afterwards, the Church of the Unitarian Brotherhood closed down and its 60 or so members dispersed. Carter died in poverty in 1962 and was buried in an unmarked grave. A sad saga. And yet, this is not the end of the story. In 1998, when the Reverend Sharon Dittmar told this historical tale to the congregants in the First Church of Cincinnati, which is a very wealthy church, one of the members rose and announced, "That's my grandfather you're talking about. I never thought I'd hear his name mentioned in a Unitarian church." The congregation realized that they could not let the drama stop. They held a racial reconciliation weekend with more than 100 descendants of Beulah and W.H.G. Carter and their families. Now, in place of the unmarked grave is a headstone that proclaims W.H.G. Carter, pioneer Unitarian minister. Pretty cool. It's important to add one more story. In the late 1960s and 70s, it was an extremely difficult time for our country in general, and Unitarian Universalists in particular. In the early 60s, many of us marched with Dr. King, and we participated in additional civil rights actions. Nationally, the end of the decade, though, was dominated by Black empowerment pioneers. At the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly, Black and white Unitarian Universalists separately and jointly demanded funds for grants to fight political repression and economic exploitation in the Black community, and to support Black cultural expressions and community education. The demands were accepted, but after the first year, the UUA ran out of money, and they couldn't honor the agreement. The ensuing controversy at the 1969 GA was loud, in your face, and acrimonious. And so, with no money forthcoming, the participating groups ceased to exist. The UUA lost approximately 1,000 African American members and retreated from all active involvement in the civil rights movement. I'm going to repeat that. It's so important to our group. The UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association, lost approximately 1,000 African American members and retreated from all active involvement in the civil rights movement. Membership and morale dropped precipitously. According to Reverend Mark Morrison Reed, the conference sent shockwaves throughout the UUA. Ben Scott, who was there, recalled, "I'm not the only UU who was irreversibly shaped by it. Thousands were born again. They came to a better understanding of the whole world through the Black Affairs Council. They came to a thrilling sense of the awesome potential of human society. In our little UU corner of the world, lifelong friendships afterward crumbled, marriages dissolved, careers were ended, and congregations fractionalized. For many, what happened during the ensuing years would be nothing less than life-defining." How could that happen in a denomination which so values the worth and dignity of every individual? A denomination which preaches treating everyone with respect and dignity. No one likes to give up power. You think it's easy for us? Decisions by their nature require judgment calls, a weaving of our reactions and our reason. The ability to recognize our feelings is an important determination of our actions. Now, you are invited to sit back and steep yourself in a true story. As you relax into it, listen not only to the action, but also to the strong brew of emotions from which each person acted. Step into the shoes of either the youth or the adults and listen to your heart. First, a little background. Before each year's General Assembly, interest groups such as the choir, the ministers, the youth, they meet in mini caucuses. In June 2005, the Leadership Development Council, a youth leadership group consisting of both youth and young adults, met in Dallas, Texas, before General Assembly in nearby Fort Worth. Unfortunately, the Youth Caucus staff did not make hotel reservations in time, so the youth were spread out among various hotels. Now think about that. Teenagers in a new town, a very large town, perhaps their very first large time from home UU meeting, separated with each other, not only by rooms, but also by distance between hotels. Then the conference got off to a very rocky start. The Dallas church where they were meeting had envisioned the group as just merely another rental group, so they weren't involved in the planning at all. Whereas the youth leaders thought that they would be treated as special guests. I mean, they were UUs. Tension grew as expectations were not met. It was reported that interactions with parishioners were sometimes strained and even insulting. There are reports from the youth of harassment by local law enforcement officers and residents. It simply did not go well. Now, when the caucus ended, the youth then began arriving in Fort Worth for General Assembly. However, once again, there was a shortage of rooms in the immediate convention area, and once again, the youth were scattered. There were several incidents in which youth of color were mistaken for hotel employees by GA participants, and they were asked to perform menial tasks. Additionally, there were reported incidents in which hotel employees tended to the needs of the white youth but ignored the youth of color. Racial incidents continued to be reported. The youth of color felt threatened at times, and at times the meetings, when the meetings were for the youth of color started, they were shared. All the stories were shared. So the youth of color and their young adult leadership decided that the delegates at GA needed to know about their pain and brokenness, and that the best course of action was to stop the assembly meetings and request that their stories be heard. Representatives left to arrange for a chance to speak to the delegates. However, their timing was too late. The closing ceremony had already begun, so there was no official way for the youth of color to address the delegates, increasing their tension and frustration. Now, at this point, can you feel their emotional upheaval, their frustration, their anger, their rage? 3 young men of color left the caucus meeting and headed to the convention center. There, they began to perform a nonviolent protest by requesting programs from the ushers and then throwing them down, sometimes tearing them up first and then throwing them down. What do the ushers know? How do they feel? Do they have a clue what's happening or what to do about it? The youth repeated these actions several times in the convention hall to make the delegates notice. One usher was concerned about their actions and asked another usher to determine the cause. Since the youth were not visibly wearing name tags, she also asked the other usher to determine whether or not they were youth or locals who had just entered the hall. Now, some words were exchanged between the male usher and the youth as they continued their protest. These interactions began to attract the attention of others. A youth officer staffer tried to intervene, but he only made it worse. More people came, more people became aware of the actions and the protests. A minister intervened, and she challenged the three young men. Harsh words were exchanged, and the young men began to exit the hall, headed for the lobby. The minister followed them. I wonder what was her goal then. Before they reached the lobby, but at about the same time, the rest of the youth of color, having finished their caucus, arrived in that lobby, still determined to somehow address the delegates. It is reported that some youth and young adult leaders expressed their frustrations. Others tried to find white allies and folks in power to assist them in finding a way to address the delegates. Other people of color leadership reached the agitated gathering in the lobby. It was that moment, at the very time that they were trying to determine what to do and what happened, that the three young men who were involved and the minister entered the lobby. It is reported that harsh words were exchanged very loudly, that the minister appeared to be following the young men, and the men and the youth decided to distance themselves from her and tried to leave. Now, with everyone in the lobby, some of the youth came to the defense of the three, telling the minister that they were UU youth and they were a part of this community. The situation continued to escalate, with more and more people drawing themselves into both the crowd and the conversation. Youth, young adults, delegates, ministers, staffers, a member of the board of trustees. As some of the youth tried to disengage, one young woman made a comment that seemed to infuriate the minister. Words usually reserved for an urban street argument were exchanged at increasing volume. It is reported that both the minister and the youth had to be restrained. At that point, the UUA moderator ordered the minister to distance herself from the situation several times. The minister eventually left the lobby. The moderator then negotiated for meetings back at the Radisson Hotel. The youth and supporters left the lobby for the hotel meetings. End of our story. Our story of privilege and race, of UU's desire to live their values, and how often in daily life we get sidetracked. Is there any group that was right? Is there any group that knew what to do? More importantly, is there anyone in that scene who did not enter it in good faith? Do you think they'll find a solution? In this huge group of well-meaning UUs from all over the country, was it anyone's aim to harm or cause ill will? Or were they each trying to right a perceived wrong? It's a tough situation. And it's so like the perilous climate that we are now in. Angry and anxious Americans are facing circumstances which we feel need to be changed right now. We are in a political and a social climate that has the potential to divide and alienate us into opposing, non-associating factions. Emotions are high, and the productive path is unclear. And yet, each of us, as hard as it may seem, is fighting for what we think is right. It is very clear that very few of us can afford to sit this one out. We will need to make our voices heard. We don't exactly know what we're doing, but our faith can help us. If nothing else, remember the songs in our tradition. We must side with love. We must be committed, because once we get that fire of commitment, we can open up. An African American UU in this story, but later on, said to a white woman in the story, "It's time for you to go back to your white friends and talk about this." What a wonderful and prescient statement that was. Go back to the safety of your community where you can figure out what happened and be greeted with alternatives from a loving and forgiving perspective. This is beloved community in action. To be in community, to work toward justice, is a goal of so many Unitarian Universalists. As we close, let us remember to never sit silently, but let the truth in our hearts be our guide as we move on the side of love. Let us truly believe that when the fire of commitment sets our mind and our soul ablaze, then our promise finds fulfillment, and then our future can begin. And throughout, let us remember that we are all human, all imperfect humans, trying to do the best that we can. We give thanks to our community. We work with each other. We both give and receive in our quest to live our values. Let us do our best. Let us keep on taking one more step. May it be so.
History, how people who we've looked up to sometimes have very clay feet, and things aren't quite as clear as they often would be. This discussion can continue after we finish our service today. As we get ready to start our service, and our information, I believe, will be shown up here on the screen. There it is. Let us work very much at giving not only of our time, but of all of our gifts here. The offering is a sacrament of the free church, and you may place your donations in the baskets by the doors, or by contacting the information here and giving this. And we'd like to thank you for these gifts, and I believe there's a piece now by Forrest. These gifts, and may we use them wisely in the service of our congregation and our community. I'd also like to thank all our volunteers. We would just simply not be here today if it were not for these people. It's people like Diane, who I think is our only person from Sunday service here at the moment, but we would not have our meetings today if we did not have that. Forrest is one of the people who provides us music and beautifully, and our services just would not be as good if it weren't for him. Matt in the back. Matt, stick your head out here. People can thank you, or at least let you see on through there. And for all of our people at home, we would not, you would not be seeing us if it were not for Matt. So we would do it, and we also want to thank our Zoom host. Who is our Zoom host for today? Do we know? Yeah, I think it's John and Lisa. And John and Lisa, thank you. And if I've missed that, then I apologize, but we do want to do that. The only community news that I know of before we close today is that this is our Sunday, and as the editor of the newsletter, everybody get in anything that you would like to share. We'll just like to bring everybody up to date, and we get a lot of readership that doesn't come in our ordinary people, and people like to keep up with us, so please feel free to share anything. It will go in there. And we have one more thing.
Yes, just from Lisa Del Porto, our bill to restore voting rights to Kentuckians with felonies just got filled, and it needs a push. I will put this out on our action table. I suggest you take a photo of the legislative hotline, and please call tomorrow morning. If you have never received the 7 principles and the proposed 8th principle, we have sheets out there. Please pick one up so that this will be voted on at the May congregational meeting. Thank you.
And if you have any questions about joining, finding out more about membership, you can do that with members of our membership board. Do we have any of our membership board right now? Yes, we see a couple of people here. Feel free to ask them any questions on that. I don't know if they can tell you how far away Alpha Centauri is, but they'd be pretty happy to answer questions about doing this. And also information's on our website and our Facebook page. We have come to the point where we are going to do, I believe, our last hymn. Is there a final hymn?
Yes. How many of y'all sung this hymn before, Fire of Commitment? Raise your hands. If you know this. Say what? How many of you have sung this hymn in the past, Fire of Commitment? Yeah. Do you know it? Yeah. Raise your hand. All right, good. Because I'm going to ask you not to sing it. I'm going to ask you, Deane had wanted me to play through all 3 verses, and this is a kind of a long hymn. However, there is something called audiation, which is imagining yourself singing. And I want you to do that. I want you to imagine inside your head, you're singing this as you read the words. I'm going to do the same thing. And imagine yourself singing full-throated, singing absolutely with wild abandon, and with perfect pitch. So, here we go. Thank you. Because if you didn't know already by the look of our faces, there is still a pandemic going on. And singing is one of the most efficient ways to transmit this virus, because of the way singing affects the breathing. So I don't want to do that. I just don't want to do that.
The final reading this morning is going to be words by Joseph M. Cherry. And it's called Prayer for Living Intention. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. Amama, blessed be, amen. Peace, shalom, shalom, namaste, gasa. We will now be closing our live stream here. We have enjoyed being with you, and we now bid farewell to those who've joined us online. And we hope that you find this service meaningful, and we invite you to join again. Be well and go in peace. Now,